a quick read, but
Okay.
I can start. I can start with the wetlands if you want. So back in 2022, I believe, as part of some big bill that our governor and our legislative body passed, it expanded the protection on the wetland zone in New York State. It basically rendered the old wetlands map as a reference point, not an actual um, rule of regulation any longer. And it's extended the amount of potential protected area in New York State by 1 to 2 million miles. Um, it's a big change. There's a lot of things in there that talk about vestigial ponds, where if you have a pond on your property and you want to build on your property, you likely need to have somebody come in and do a study on it, to do an egg count on amphibian life. And if it's over a certain density of egg content, then there's an 800 to 1,000 foot setback all the way around that pond, in which you'll have to get a permit or variance if they'll allow you to pass it. It's very impactful around certain lakes and the Finger Lakes, specifically Cuca Lake. The entire lake is outlined now as a hot zone of places where you need to go through an elevated review process in order to get a permit. Um, we at Iswata are just starting to dig into it. Um, we've got our legislative body and lawyers slash lobbyists looking into it. We're also engaging with some of the home builders associations to discuss that, and how it impacts them. Because if you can't get a building permit, you can't drill a water well or a geothermal bore. Um, so it could be a major impact moving forward. And any of these wetlands, flooded protected areas. And we think that Cuca was targeted because they're one of the few lakes that can control their outflow. Um, and they historically lower the level of that lake significantly in the winter, and it causes some issues downstream of it. And this was a way to get back at that watershed. Um, the Empire State Water Well Drillers Association is obviously concerned about this, and through a certain subset, it does concern us in the geothermal community, mainly because of why I said, if you can't build a house, you can't drill, you might be able to get a permit on existing homes. And they're going through the permitting process, the feedback process for some of the various permits. I think they want to go to 3 or 4 different permit types. Um, it extends the speedies permit and what aspects of that you have to cover. There was a decrease in the amount of area that if you disturb it, now you have to have your stormwater protection plan. In some cases, it's less than a quarter of an acre. So even putting a driveway in just to get access to something, has a major impact on cost. I think that's pretty much it, because I rambled off the top of my head. Um, sure that there'll be conversation on it, and maybe by the conference in April, we'll have more information. Um, I'm not sure, who at the DEC, if that's something they'd even want to speak on. They did hire, with this bill, they added 4 staff members under their wetlands division, 2 biologists, 1 staff person to oversee it, and then a 4th person to be named. I'm not sure if that was going to be an administrative role, if it was going to be a public outreach person to take all this information to all of the municipalities in New York State. And um, a lot of it seems to be pushed onto the local municipalities. They need to be aware of the change in the regulation and adopt it into their building code and their permit process. And then they have some level of review and oversight. And it's up to the municipality, I believe, that if they aren't comfortable issuing a straightforward permit, then they push it up further for review. And it's a very limited amount of people that can oversee these permits, that can do the background on it. The state has done a lot of work with their LiDAR imaging, mapping all parts of New York State, both from a bedrock situation, and as part of it, it also identified a lot of the wetlands that were missed in like the 1960s, the last time they did this survey. So it could significantly impact the pace of construction, the pace of gaining a permit, just more red tape to do just about anything. And from the construction cycle, there's a lot of real estate in, what I consider upstate New York. So everything that's not kind of like Westchester, south and east, but the rest of New York State, the majority of the mass, where you're not going to commit to purchasing a piece of property unless you are certain that it has water. And if you have to go through a very difficult permit process in order to determine that, then it just, a project that you might start in 6 months now might be 12 to 18 months before you start. It's just a delay. And to steal a phrase from one of my favorite movies, that's all I got to say about that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, anybody have any questions on the drilling in the wetlands? Is this a law that was passed last year or is under consideration?
No, it was a law that was passed in 22.
22.
They entered the, rulemaking process 2 years ago. It was, we never heard of it. I don't know how that skipped through our lobbyist, but I think that a lot of their eyes and attention was pulled off on the deeper than 500-foot thing. And so they weren't really reading between the lines on this wetland aspect of it. It never came across the New York-GEO's front that I'm aware of. And the rules went into effect January 1st this year.
And
so they went through.
It filtered down through the local municipalities. There's 45 municipalities in Westchester County. All of these inspectors slash heads of the building department went to some conference on soil and erosion control where the wetlands were definitely brought up and mentioned. They are so far reaching now that there are several municipalities and others are going to tag along. You can't pull a permit unless you take the 6-hour soil and erosion control, get certified. I actually called the state to ask. They said, what's the size of the project? I said, honestly, 7 feet by 7 feet. It's a 49 square foot area. He goes, somebody needs to be reeled in. His words, not mine. This is Hastings on the Hudson. But every municipality is going to copy them. It's nonsense, but true.
It's anything they can do to shut down what you can do on your property. Oversight, regulation. I mean, the whole aspect that if I have a pond on a piece of property and I buy a 2-acre piece of property and there's a pond in the middle of it, that piece of property, if it has frogs' eggs in it, becomes a dead zone.
Correct.
You can't do anything on it without going through extensive permitting process. And at that point, you're at the whim of a stamp. So, it's disheartening that we're where we are with stuff like this. And I get there's aspects of New York State that, you got to be super cautious about things, but the mass majority of New York State, you don't. And here we are. I'd like to say best intentions, but I just don't have faith in that statement in this case at all.
So
Kevin,
we're in a
relative to New York-GEO awareness, if you'd like a short, 3-sentence thing to go out in Justin, so the folks who read Justin know about it, I'd be happy to to take whatever you can send me in a couple sentences and work that into a brief for Justin.
Okay, I'll take a look. I mean, I know that Joanne, because she was at our state meeting when this kind of came to light back in January. And we did we do a roundtable where we talk about various issues and opportunities and everything else. And this came up, it had come up in our board of directors meeting. And she took it, and I'll have to dig up the email that she sent. I can't remember if anybody from NY-GEO other than I was on that email, but I'll send it. She did a pretty good deep dive into reading some of it. So how it all relates and what it all means, it's such a big thing. We're still trying to filter through it.
Understood, and certainly we can't get all of that in a brief, but just letting people know it exists and providing a source for further information would be, I think, helpful.
I'm not sure where that source for further information exists yet.
And that could be said. Could be
Yeah.
said, come to the conference and learn about it.
It's a good segue, Bill. So Kevin, why don't you tell us about election processes?
I gotta pull up my phone. Hold on.
Okay.
I gotta get into the correct email to see where it was sent, because Christine did a good job of summarizing it. So next, that Thursday, we have our annual membership meeting. It's going to be a Zoom-based meeting, noon, I believe, noon to 1, if that serves. And we are looking for additional board members to fill a couple roles, a couple seats. And Zach and I are on the nomination committee. I think somehow I lost the vote and I get to be the chairperson of this. And so we're looking for a couple folks that want to join the committee, the nomination committee, the review committee. And we're also looking for nominations for the board of directors at NY-GEO. Essentially what we're going to do from the nomination committee, we've got 3 to 5 total people, one of which is going to be a board member, which is me and Zach. So we need 3 or 4 more other people. And when we do the nominations, they're going to get sent to us. They got to be NY-GEO members in good standing. Each potential nominee will be interviewed by at least 2 of the nominating committee members before the committee submits the final selection to the full board of directors. Each director shall serve a term of 5 years, which can be extended by the board of directors for additional terms or until a successor has been elected and qualified. And I'm kind of just reading that as we go through. And if anybody wants to join the committee to select some new board of directors, reach out to me and we can have a conversation about it. And if anybody has anybody that they would like to nominate, I guess I'm that person also.
Can you do self-nominations?
I do not know the rule for that. Bill, do you know the rule? Can somebody self-nominate?
They can suggest themselves to the committee is, I think, the way the process is set up at this point.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Kevin on any of that? Hey, Kevin, before we move off of letting you take a breather, I had a chance to meet the facilities director at a Putnam Valley school, high school, elementary school, etc. And they're trying to sell to the school board more geothermal heating and cooling. They've got a 20-year system in their high school and about a 10, 15-year system in their elementary school. At the end of the meeting, I mentioned to him that that they should be able to drill deeper than 500 feet. Did I stick my foot in my mouth or not?
Putnam County, you should be fine.
Okay.
And again, as of now, I'm going to put on my Carrie Friello voice. Currently in New York State, there are no regulations regarding the drilling of a geothermal borehole deeper than 500 feet. It does not absolve you from needing to engage the other aspects, the other divisions of the DEC, specifically speedies and material for what you do with the cuttings and the water and everything that comes out of that borehole. They should be releasing some kind of look at what their regulations are going to be in the next 30 to 60 days. It may time up that it becomes a very interesting outreach point at our conference in April.
Okay, thank you. And I sent him a copy of the sheet that we've got on our website. So he seemed to be a pretty happy guy, saying, that might be a game changer for him. So
It gets messy if they're trying to connect existing with a different design configuration. It can be managed, but if they're trying to drill more boreholes and tie them all into one big loop, there's some maths that have to be worked out there. It's not simply plug and play, but it's workable.
yeah, I don't think it is the connection, but I didn't
Okay.
get any more details. Great. Thank you very much for all that information. Bill and Bob, you guys want to talk to us about the analysis for the long-term planning?
Sure. Can you share? Can I share?
I think you can. Yeah, I think you're set up.
Okay. All right. So this is in the first quarter of 2023, as part of the gas planning process, this 20G0131, the gas utilities submitted fairly extensive spreadsheets, of which this is a summary of one of them, one of the worksheets within the spreadsheets, as part of the gas planning process. And here's the link for this. If you go into this link, you will find that items for Central Hudson are at 164 in terms of the number, but it's all in the first quarter of 2023. And basically what they did, they were instructed to file estimates of what they would be spending under three different scenarios. One is business as usual, which it's pretty clear they're not going to be able to carry on business as usual because they need to participate in reducing greenhouse gases. The other is a high electrification scenario. And one of the weaknesses of what I'm presenting here is that we don't have a clear idea of how any of these things are defined. I probed the Department of Public Service and asked them where these things are defined, and they said basically it's just in the order, and the order is not clear on everything they took into account. But they were each to submit a business as usual, a high electrification, and a medium electrification set of depreciation numbers. And it turns out that there is a vast gap between the high electrification numbers, which are much lower than either the business as usual or the medium. So taking, for example, this is Kedley, this is the National Grid Long Island Gas Company. Here are the figures for business as usual. And it comes out by the time we get to 2050 to be $20 billion for business as usual. For the medium electrification, which you would think maybe intuitively would be smaller than business as usual, it is higher. And the reason it is higher, I would submit, is likely to be because they're figuring on doing some electrification and also using hydrogen and renewable natural gas to get at greenhouse gas emissions. And that's expensive for them to do. That means increasing infrastructure in many cases. So for example, for National Grid's Long Island gas utility, they'd be spending $20 billion over the next couple decades under a business as usual scenario. For a high electrification scenario, they would be spending $15 billion. And for a medium electrification scenario, they'd be submitting $21 billion. Now, you might be wondering where the $15 billion comes from in the high electrification scenario. And that's just minimizing the amount of leak-prone pipe that's being replaced to what seriously needs to be replaced for reliability and safety. So they would need to spend $15 billion just to keep the lines open that they will need to be supplying people who are left on the system over these next 25 years to replace leak-prone pipe and leaking pipe, seriously leak-prone. So what I've done, these numbers in these columns up to the 35th row are directly copied out of the spreadsheet that the utilities filed. And like I say, I think Bob Wyman did this work, but if he didn't, maybe I did this work, but I at least, I know I checked some of the work at one point, and these are the numbers that they filed.
Yeah, Bill, I was just digging through mail. I found it, but we had this exchange in email back in May of 2023. It was a long time ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is not new information. And
Yeah.
I've been kind of pounding it wherever I can. The Building Decarbonization Coalition has a separate estimate, and I have yet to find out where theirs came from, but theirs came to $28 billion. So I've got the spreadsheet laid out for each utility, and then a total. And the total for all the utilities filing is a $33 billion difference between the high electrification and the medium electrification scenario.
And this is the cost. This is the cost of the utility bill.
Yeah. Yep.
Is there a
This is what the utilities
Well,
would be
no,
spending
it's-
on gas infrastructure that would not be necessary if they were doing high electrification.
Understand? Is there a comparable spreadsheet or analysis done on the revenue projections behind this work? Because we just went through this whole moratorium in gas in the county, only for it to be rescinded now. And the $120 million they spent a year, I know compared to this, it's not, a number that everyone's staring at. But we've been doing this now for 3-4 years. We're into this for $500 million. And people are just now waking up saying, wait a second, my rate went from 22 cents a kilowatt to 32 cents, and I'm in a worse place I was than when we started. Why did I do this? I hear this every day now.
Yeah, no, I think you'll find that there are no long-term projections of revenues. There are long-term projections of production, of expenses, of many other things. But the projections, at least the ones I'm aware of, don't include revenues.
Okay.
But I mean, the issue you're talking about is it's been going on for much more than 3 or 4 years. We've been working this issue for like in excess of a decade, I think.
So, when we look at the New York Heat Act and all the different efforts that are being made to limit the cost to ratepayers of gas expansion, to me, this is a key set of documents provided by the utilities themselves that shows there is a way forward that will save us a lot of money. The problem with explaining this to the public is it's all in the future. It's if we don't let them spend all this money, our bills won't go up that much. So it's not like, with New York Heat, there are things that would save money on a short-term basis, but certainly trying to get across the picture that this gas infrastructure is A, unneeded by the utility's own estimates, and B, really expensive, is important information to
Bill?
get out there.
Question,
Yep.
where's the other side of the equation? So this is the gas side, talking about their expenses, business as usual, medium electrification, and then obviously high electrification means they're not doing as much. Where's the other side of this, what the electric side of these utilities are projecting?
Well, they weren't required to do this as part of their gas planning
Yeah.
process.
It's-
There certainly are a lot of projections that electric utilities are making relative to their infrastructure costs. And as we all know, geothermal is kind of the saving grace within that whole set
Boy,
of
I'll tell
projections
you
that we need
what,
to get across.
I'll tell you what, it is and it isn't, because I can't tell you the number of customers, and it varies from town to town, municipality to municipality, and county to county. This electric increase that everybody has seen this year, because they all had the wrong forecast and we didn't buy enough electricity. I've got customers that went from 16 cents to 23 cents in upstate New York. And when you switch from gas to air source, they're losing their minds.
Yeah.
And when you switch from gas to GEO, they're still losing their minds. It's,
I'll chime in and say yes. My last this electric bill I just got, despite the fact that I'm on the great rate that I constantly sing about, this bill was like my old bills. That's how
Yep.
much the rate increase was. Astonishing.
it's
Okay,
there
guys,
was two jumps. One in November, then one in December. And it's not like they sent that out in the mail. It's just, here you go.
okay, guys, the important thing to understand here is, even though people may be unhappy at the moment for a variety of reasons, okay, they will be much more unhappy in the future if we standardize on, if we either continue with business as usual or we standardize on air source heat pumps. The
Agreed.
only way we can build a grid with enough capacity to serve the needs after electrification is if we have heat pumps of the efficiency that are provided by ground source heat pumps. So the fact that people are upset simply establishes the challenge, okay? But it shouldn't change anybody's assumptions. Geothermal is still and will remain, okay, a key to an affordable energy future. And that really shouldn't be questioned. Intermediate, events may cause it more difficult or easier to get that message across, but nonetheless, that is the message that needs to get gotten across, is that you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you install air source. And government officials who encourage air source, or utility officials who encourage air source, are just shooting themselves in the foot. We need to figure out how in God's name do we get people onto ground and water source systems.
Well, we talked about it for a long time,
Yeah,
There
well, we
was
got more
this-
talking to do because we don't have.
Well,
any
I know. But what I'm saying is there was this, agenda push through NYSERDA that let's just brand it heat pumps. And, heat pumps are great, heat pumps are great, heat pumps are great. Well, at some point in time, I've been pretty loud about this. NYSERDA's got to come out and make an actual statement that, one technology is going to get us where we need to. The other one is going to crash everything that we're doing, worse than what the gas infrastructure is doing.
Well, I don't think you want to go that far. But I
You
think
know
it
me,
depends
Bill, I'm
on
an
which-
extremist. Or Bob, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. I think you got to understand that people say different things depending on which issue they're focused on. If you're focused on climate, and climate is your only focus, then frankly, any heat pump of any kind is a good thing because it reduces emissions. If you're focused on pollution, say, which actually has a much larger near-term monetized value than the climate change does, you would go for any heat pump. If, on the other hand, you want to have an affordable, sustainable future, then you have to be focused on geothermal. But the people will break out into different groups depending on what is the focus of their attention, what motivates them. Okay, very few people are aware of the long-term affordability issue with grid capacity. Everybody thinks about the grid problem as one of, oh, how do we get more solar panels? How do we get more wind panels, wind turbines? How do we get more nuclear power? That sort of thing, right? They're thinking about the production of kilowatt hours. They're thinking about the production of energy. What very few people realize is this is not an energy problem. This is an energy distribution problem. The grid is wires, it's transformers, it's substations. Okay, and we can have all the solar panels in the world, but if you can't pump the electrons through some wires, it didn't do you any good. Okay, the issue of grid capacity is simply not even on the agenda today, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to talk about it. Because if you do talk about it, people are just going to think you're talking about some weird ass bullshit that doesn't matter, without realizing that you're really talking about the core issue behind the whole project. Hey, by the way, Bill, can I share for a moment? I want to send you that. I want to show that
Sure.
slide that I sent you like over a year ago, right? Here. Can everybody see that? That's the slide showing the three scenarios. This is just for this summed them up. But you see the most expensive scenario across the board in almost all years, except for the very first, okay, is the medium electrification. Building as usual, business as usual is second, and then the vastly much cheaper one is the high electrification. People need to understand this message. It's a very important one. And I think the graph just shows you very clearly. If you're worried about, what things cost, just look at the freaking graph.
And you thought you didn't have anything to do with that spreadsheet.
Well, it was a long time ago, man.
How can
So
we,
if people, are interested, I'm happy to email this to you. I'll put my email in the chat and let me know. I thought I had been bringing this up enough that a lot of people were aware of it. And then I mentioned it again at a Renewable Heat Now meeting the other day and got bunches of requests for this. It's something that people are hungry for as they're really centering in on what the benefits of the New York Heat Act can be and, the overall kind of struggle that we're involved with.
But Bill, it's important. An important point here is that what you see in those charts is just spending. It has nothing to do with nothing. It tells you nothing about bill impact. Okay.
Right.
The problem here is that if we're assuming that we will have continued either efficiency in our use of gas, or we will have continued electrification, then we have to get back to the issue that I know so many of you are probably bored to hear me talk about, which is the depreciation issue, cost recovery issue, in that the fewer units of gas you sell, the fewer therms you sell, the fewer therms you have to spread the cost of that spending. And the current projections are, if we were to achieve, say, the goal of like an 80% reduction in emissions from gas, that would cause somewhere on the order of a 700 to 800% increase in the delivery cost of gas. So to think about that is that at that point, even if the gas commodity, the methane itself, was free, okay, you would still have an explosion in the cost of delivered gas, because you have fewer and fewer people who are paying for that tremendous amount of spending that you saw in that chart there. Okay. And what we need to do is we need to get the gas system to incorporate the idea into its planning that they should be building a system to meet the needs of their customers, as opposed to simply saying, oh, how do we like just keep all these pipes going for the next 80 or 90 years? That just doesn't make sense. If we believe that gas use is going to be declining, we have to forecast what that decline will be, and then we have to build plans that fit with the forecasts of decline, as opposed to these plans, which are just, we got a whole bunch of pipes. This is what it's going to cost to keep them going. And a big part of this spending, especially in the early years, that you see in the spending projections they made, is assuming that they're replacing all of what they call the leak-prone pipe, which has nothing to do with whether or not the pipe is leaking. It's just any pipe which is of a type that they wouldn't install today. They just randomly say, okay, it's leak-prone, and we should replace it. In other words, we've got maybe 30 years left to gas in the state if we're going to meet our climate goals, but they're replacing assets today. They're basically building out. They're replacing assets today that have been in use for a while with new assets that are going to have 80, 90-year life. That's insane.
Bill,
If I could, Rob, you were asking, I think this might be helpful in some way. The information that was in the spreadsheet was from one worksheet. Each of the utilities filed something with, probably a dozen or more worksheets that dealt with different aspects of gas planning. This was one that looked at depreciation and spending, but in terms of the information you're looking for, some of it might be in some of the other worksheets. So, if you let me know, I'll send you a copy of the spreadsheet. It's got the link to where those spreadsheets are, and then you can look at the other worksheets as well.
Excellent.
so I have a question, Bill. This is depreciation. These are depreciation numbers, and that's the bellwether sign for kind of
those are
total cost.
spending numbers. Those are spending numbers.
Right, because that'll include labor for capital projects to put the pipes in. It'll factor in the salvage value, that kind of stuff, right?
I don't think salvage value is considered in these tables. I think this is just the raw spend.
Okay. Okay.
Salvage value is hard to project. Well, we know the pipes themselves will have no value. It's negative salvage value, which is what you need to compute when you're doing the calculations of the utilities. It's how much is it going to cost them to get the stuff out of the ground, or how much is it going to cost them to take it out of service, which is a negative salvage value. Almost always with gas and electricity, the salvage value is negative. It's never positive.
So we could add that, in
Oh yeah,
talking to somebody, say, and this doesn't even include the cost to take it out of the ground.
right. Well, the good thing about
Bob, I think we lost you for a minute. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Bob was having some trouble before getting connected. While he's trying to get back on, any other issues that people want to talk about? Got 12 minutes left or so. I'm glad we're recording this though.
I think we've got an opportunity with New York State in having a standards page printed up for any and all different types of geothermal. We could have conversations at the conference, but a lot of consumers, I'm getting calls from people, and I don't want to say daily, but it's definitely weekly, saying, is there any way you could help me? I had a geothermal installation done and I'm having problems. And I asked, how many feet of pipe do you have in the ground? I don't know. Who installed your system? ABC company. Okay. How many tons do you have in your house? I think we have 8 tons, let's say. Okay. So if you've got 8 tons, you need X number of feet of pipe. Why don't you go to the building department, pull the permit? So at least you have a starting point of how to communicate for help. Just because we're installing and succeeding doesn't mean we're winning. I'm now getting calls, and I'm sure other people are getting calls and concerns that what people have purchased, they're not happy with. And there was a statistic just printed that 50% of people, that's pretty high, guys, 50% of people purchasing geothermal are unsatisfied. That's a terrible number. I mean, I was speaking to Bill Busher. That's where I got that number. It's a national survey of geothermal installations across the country. So I think we need to get ahead of that in New York State so that people, when someone says, what do I do? Well, as a starting point, go to New York-GEO and look up the answers to your questions. Like
What are the typical complaints though? Not working
the
means
house
a
is
lot
not
of,
heating. House is not heating.
Hmm.
My house is cold. It's down to 62 degrees. What do I do? Well,
and
you're
what service territory are you? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I said, what service territory are you? Sorry.
This is I'm in Westchester and Fairfield County. I know you guys don't care about Fairfield, but that's
I wouldn't say I don't care, but
I'm
yeah,
saying.
okay.
Not interest.
Westchester, okay, that's what I was wondering.
It's Westchester County.
And I've contacted about problems that I know of too, that have been going on since 2018.
Ooh.
Interesting timestamp there, Billy.
So geothermal has historically had a lot of problems, which is almost entirely due to insufficient contractor experience and education. I don't want to just lay the blame on the installers, but because it's an emerging technology, so to speak, people are just not familiar enough with the specifications of it to always execute it well. And there's a very difficult ask for many contractors in that they are creating a heat exchanger. You know, instead of having a gas line that's hooked to a house of the right size to deliver the necessary BTUs, they have to create the heat exchanger. And there are very, very few contractors who are trying to install geothermal who actually understand how to create a proper heat exchanger that will serve the house. Overwhelmingly, people use rules of thumbs and what is everybody else doing in the region. That is one of the number one things that has to be stopped if the complaints about geothermal are going to be reduced. Because if the earth loop is going down to 25 degrees, the house sometimes will be cold, especially if there's no backup heat. The other complaint that's common is, why is my electric bill $800 on my 3,000 square foot house? It's because excessive backup heat, which again is often traceable to undersized earth loops. So I believe that geothermal has a lot of complaints, and it's in my experience, it's not usually the manufacturers building machines that have problems, although that does happen. But I don't think that they build worse equipment than most of the other manufacturers. I think that we are putting people into a position of installing stuff that they have they are insufficiently prepared to be installing. It is not the same as just dropping in replacement systems and connecting them to a line and leaving. So yes, this is a big issue. There are a lot of complaints about geothermal, and they are very often justified. A lot of the time, geothermal doesn't work because it was not installed to be able to work. What do we do about that?
I,
Who knows?
I always look at, so every time I get a call from somebody, um, you know, there's always the, what are we experiencing? What is the cause? What is the effect? And almost invariably, the complaints that I see are people chasing that dollar number. Comfort comes from, if electricity rates are cheap and the system is performing perfectly, then yeah, they don't notice that bill. When that bill starts to go up, because of a loop, small percentage of it centered around the loop, the greater percentage of it is the 5-10 cent increase that a lot of homeowners have seen over the last couple of years in their utility rate. And when you're 6, 7, 8,000 kilowatts in a 2,500 square foot home, that 5-10 cent increase makes them think that there's an issue. They lower their thermostat, which decreases their comfort, and they're chasing things. 9 times out of 10, that is the conversation that I have. It used to be somebody would call and complain because they had signed up on an ESCO because they thought it would save them a bunch of money. And they get hit with these massive rate increases, and you can track through it. And that's not to say that there aren't issues with installations. I think that we know that, and the spotlight is definitely on a geothermal homeowner. It's a higher price tag. It's a Cadillac system, Tesla system. I don't even know what you can say anymore with them. But then, you know, Jackie, you are correct. There are choices that contractors make in equipment, in design. And if you don't know the full conversation between the contractor and the homeowner, this is not an off-the-shelf thing. And there can be discussions with homeowners where they choose to go with a less efficient piece of equipment. There's a lot that goes into it. And when you start playing with the hydronic side of things, there's an issue with the hydronic manufacturing side of things right now. What they can produce, what they're rated at, how they run, how reliable they are. We're all experiencing it. And I think that anytime that there's a conversation, concern, issue, complaint, the more people that know about it, that these customers can lean on, you know, through NY-GEO, through everybody that sits on these events, I think that's a positive thing. We're not turning our back to these customers. We want to try to help and solve. And ultimately, what I find is I never want to point a finger at another contractor. I want to have a conversation with that contractor to understand the full story behind what happened. There's always two sides to this. And if it's something that you can dig into it and you can see something, and then you can educate and improve that contractor's performance, awesome. But the one thing we don't want to do as an industry is start pointing at each other instead of supporting each other. That's just going to put us down a rabbit hole that I've been there. You know, this industry has seen its share of bad actors in my service territory. You know, I don't see them anymore. I think we've pretty much all, you know, replaced, serviced, eliminated, whatever it may be, the things that we've seen. And a lot of it was centered around cutting corners, cheap equipment, DIY, give it to a plumber, give it to an HVAC guy, let them put it in there because it's cheaper to the homeowner.
Let me
And-
ask Kevin real quick, because we're running pretty low on time, and I know
Mhm.
that they'll probably need to close it down. When you get complaints, does anybody go out and measure the entering water temperature on the geothermal? Because if the
Typically-
entering water temperature is much below 30, then it's the contractor's fault. This is a fact.
No, it's not 100% a fact because circumstances within a home change. Loads can change, homeowner performance can change, or homeowner, how they live in their home can change. You know, you go into a home and they typically keep it at 68 to 72, and that's what you design it. And all of a sudden they're keeping it 75. They've added square footage. There's all kinds of things that do have an impact into how those systems perform. And so, you know, any system that I have, I can click right online and see it. And so, yes, we do check water temperatures when there's issues. All I'm saying is there can be other things that go into it. And the other piece of it, to Bill's comment or Bob's comment, God, I don't know why I keep doing that to the two of you. We don't hear the success stories either. So we hear a complaint or 2 complaints or 10 complaints, and it gets magnified. We're not hearing the 95, 98% that are perfectly happy and satisfied. And the problem ones are the ones that's Jesus, Bob, Bill. The problem ones are the ones that you know, squeaky wheel gets the grease. We want to talk to those people. We want to understand what happened. We want to understand the why. And I'm all for having those conversations.
Kevin, I brought this problem to Christine about 2 years ago, and the company fiddled around a bit with it, but they never got to the bottom. And apparently with the monitoring equipment, it kept showing that that the system was going on and off. It was like a squiggly line. I brought it to the to this meeting back then, and it's not resolved. He's given up. There's definitely an anomaly there, and the company did not bother to track it down. And it's not a fly-by-nighter company at all. And if you want to take a look at anything, I can send you what there was then. But it was very discouraging to me because I'm on Long Island, and we had Sherman, which was a real big problem because not only they were incompetent, they were crooks. And it really hurt the industry down here. So I'm very cautious about making sure that people know what they're doing and trying to resolve problems when they come up. But I got absolutely nowhere with this. And as I said, it was 2018 when it was installed. It never worked properly from the get-go. So I'd
I mean,
love to share that with you.
Yeah, we can look at it. I mean, the problem is, as we know, there's only so much bandwidth that we all have.
When stop
And
sleeping, it works.
well, you know, you kick your kids or your wife out of the house and
There
you
you
live
go.
in a van and dedicate 24/7 to just this, sure.
Like Bill?
And also, when this person talked to neighbors who also had the same installer in their area, a lot of them were not happy, and he was encouraged to sue the company that installed it, and he just didn't want to go there. But yeah, this company was not getting good reviews from the people he spoke to. Of course, they're all having bad systems, so they're all talking to one another. Yeah.
We all know the 2 places that tend to get short shifted on a geo installation is either the equipment selection, or for whatever reason, and I can't understand it, people try to put in a short loop. An extra 600 foot of pipe in a horizontal system costs you about $400. You know, it doesn't cost that much.
Agreed.
And I know from a vertical perspective, you know, a higher TC grout versus a lower TC grout, there's not a noticeable difference in cost. It's very minor. And depending on how contractors put this information in front of homeowners when you sell the cheapest piece of equipment, and you put the blame on the cost of the loop. And then you put that number in front of the homeowner, there's a push to get a sale. And downstate, particularly through these crazy rebate programs, there was an increase of price and a decrease in quality, a decrease in design accountability. It was a cash grab, air source and ground source.
And in this
You know,
situation, this was not downstate. This was somebody I knew in the Kingston area.
That's still
And
downstate to me, Billy.
Kevin, and the thing is, the belief was that there was something wrong with the actual heat pump unit, and that was never explored. And that might account for
I'll
what they
take a
say.
look at it. Is it hydronic or is it forced air?
Forced air.
So
Oh, mm.
just for relevance, the reason why I was late is because I was on a phone call with somebody who called me out of the blue in North Carolina and doesn't have a geothermal that's working. And he was very frustrated and super mad, not at me, but just when people put all this money into geo and it doesn't work, half the time it sounds like they're about to cry. They're so frustrated. They're on the phone and it's like, boy, if I was in the room with this guy and I said the wrong thing, my personal safety could be temporarily at risk. And it's always this way when people are frustrated, because the original installer does not take accountability, because the reason, a lot of the time, the reason why there is a problem is because they don't know what they're doing in the first place. And I know that everybody has to learn to be able to do anything. If a person tries to go around and put in gas furnaces, like a handyman type guy, then there's serious problems and this stuff won't work. And if you're a standard HVAC contractor, you know how to do it so that the gas furnace will run and people will be warm and there won't be any trouble, except that gas is a problem in the long term. But people very often just do not understand the parts of geothermal that are specific to geothermal. And there are details. There is fine-tuned troubleshooting with, I 2 weeks ago, I dealt with one of my own customers, and I won't name the manufacturer, but they're one of the big six. You know what the problem was? It's a radiant unit, and the source coil and the load coil sensors were swapped. And I had not encountered this on this brand before, and so I had to go to the dealer and call his board guy, and the customer ended up swapping those sensors so that nobody had to come out because he needed to get up and running. If a person like me who's been doing it 20 years could be fooled by a sensor issue and have to talk to the board guy from the manufacturer, then what chance does a person that's been doing it for 2 or 3 years have? They're just going to give their customer the runaround until their customer stops talking to them. So training and having some kind of, first of all, we need to have like tiered support. People who are getting into it, they need to know some basic essentials, and they need to understand the tiers of support that they need to go through, because there's a lot of fingers getting pointed all around, but the buck has to stop with the contractor, because they're the one that got the customer's money and they're the one the customer's most mad at. So there's a lot of issues. I see a lot of issues with this one today was not an earth loop issue because it was an open loop system with confirmed 2 gallons per minute per ton going through, 55-degree entering water temperature. But how many HVAC contractors going in would even know how to check that much on an open loop? Would they even know?
Yep, but Jackie,
So
this is all.
is square one kind of stuff, and half the time they don't. So they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and it's a problem. Geothermal does not have to be this hard.
Given today's environment, geothermal installers are like plumbers. They come in, they do the work, they disappear. You can never find them again. Nobody holds them responsible, and that's just the way it is, given the structure of the industry today. One of the things I'd like to remind you is if we could ever get the third-party ownership thing going,
Yep.
that it guaranteed that would dramatically increase quality across the board in the industry, because a third-party owner will simply not tolerate working with anyone who isn't capable of delivering essentially 100% guaranteed high-quality work every time. Because just the expense of like having people talk on the telephone to some pissed off homeowner, or having to do rework or whatever, that can blow the profit on, like, several installed
The
systems
already razor
for
thin
third-party.
profit,
Right,
Bob.
right,
Don't forget that.
right. Okay,
The
but
already razor thin profit.
there are no third-party owners really in existence today. But the assumption is that the margins will be thin, and that any amount of rework or
No, and
customer
you know,
will be acceptable.
to Jackie's point, I've been pushing for a long time to, the guy that installs the box, they're the ones that oversees every aspect of the rebate process. And let's be honest, that's what drives things right now. And so the loop guy, you call me to come in and I drill a loop for you. You're giving me a specification. I'm a little bit different because I'm going to double check what it is that you're doing. But if you call XYZ to come in and do a project and you design it wrong and I put it in, everybody wants to point at the loop guy. And I'd said for a while, we got to get the incentives to the guy putting in the earthwork. It's the only thing of unique value to this industry. It's what makes us what we are. And then you can turn around and have a performance-based installation that I know that loop is going to provide the correct amount of BTUs. Now, if you change your behavior as a homeowner, you add something,
But
all of a
Kevin,
sudden your garage is what it is. Yes.
you're talking about a system that depends on people doing the right thing. Okay. What I'm
Sometimes
trying
you
to-
like to think that you do.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that if we could get to the point where we had third-party ownership, okay, the third-party owners would essentially police the people who are doing deal generation for them, and they would not work with anyone who is not doing 100% good quality work. So you can build in the way we finance this stuff essentially is a large part of determining what are the pressures on the industry to deliver high quality work. And the way we finance it today, essentially individuals giving, money to what are essentially potentially flyby installers, that is a situation which is guaranteed to give us low quality installation, except for those individuals who happen to be of high moral character. But today, high moral character is not something that we see a lot in business or in politics.
Well, high moral character comes with a cost.
You're definitely right, Bob. But another way besides the third-party carriers, which they've been talking about now, I know I've been in that conversation for at least 15, maybe 20 years, is to go to a GC approach of install where the GC, the general contractor, has all of the relationships, including they're the ones who go and look, they inspect, they design, they measure out existing ductwork, they do the manual J, they hand the actual project off to the exterior drilling company, they monitor it, they look at what the HVAC contractors are doing, and the entire thing, soup to nuts, is managed by one individual. My company's been doing that for 15 years, and fortunately, it works really well. But you're
Rob,
right.
what you're describing is what I do, just for homeowners, and it works really well. I will second that.
Yeah.
When I'm the person that is directing the whole project, and I have people installing, and this is why I know that it's not necessarily the people with their hands on the ground screwing it up, because I have just handy little homeowners successfully putting these systems in all over the country. So I know that HVAC companies can do high quality work. Typically, and I have homeowners who are subcontracting drillers left, right, and center, and the drillers almost never screw anything up. I want to make that clear. when I hand them footage to drill and a way to put it together, I have almost never seen drillers do anything but what I tell them, and they do not cause me any trouble if they're hired. Some drillers are obstinate before you get a contract together, and then they don't get hired, but the ones who sign on the dotted line deliver high quality results, and I'm talking about throughout the country routinely. Drillers are very impressive from my perspective because of this. I can rely on them to do great work. And so I know in the end that if I'm seeing a geothermal locking out from 28, 27, 26 degree, entering water temperature 25, whatever it needs to get down to, I know that I know what to check to make sure before I point any fingers anywhere. So I do see that ICSPA has a class for certified geothermal inspectors, which I believe is their attempt to help to resolve some of this issue, because there are things that you can do to figure out what is going wrong and where. And it sounds like a third party setup like this would be best, because it can be difficult to figure out exactly what where in the design something specifically has gone wrong, but you can say, like to your point, Kevin, yes, their electric bill can be high if they're keeping the stat high, but if the equipment is sized and the earth loop is sized properly, or if the equipment is undersized and the earth loop is sized properly, that earth loop will not drag down below 30 degrees. They will have high backup bills, but the earth loop will not lock out. And this can all be checked. You can get a $150 meter from wherever and put it on the equipment and let it run for however long and figure out if that geothermal is running or if the backup is running. And so there is a route to figure out who screwed up, and it's not even terribly expensive. And ICSPA does have a course for training people to determine these things, because there are so many geothermal problems. ICSPA created an entire training course for certifying
The training
people.
course is really for these larger projects that they're going through.
But it is applicable to residential as
but
well.
it
The course
is.
is not terribly expensive.
But Jackie, you're kind of missing an important part of the point here. Inspection is a quality control function. Okay, figuring out who fucked up, that's a quality control function. What we need in order to be successful as an industry is we need quality assurance. We need we need built into the system disciplines that ensure that the inspectors are bored to death because they never find problems. And one of the ways to do that, okay, is, as I'm suggesting and have for years, is third-party ownership, because the third-party owners would simply not allow anyone who was not delivering consistent quality, they simply wouldn't allow them to get any money. Okay. Now, there are other things we can do, like general contractors. Okay. But the question is, does the general contractor have liability? What does he have skin in the game? That's the thing about a third-party owner, is if a system gets screwed up, the third-party owner, it costs him money. Okay. And he's got the resources to retaliate. Okay. If there is a problem, a general contractor, you can bring him in. He may do the work, but if he doesn't do it as well as it could be done, my question would be, what does it cost him? Does it cost him just a little reputation and maybe a couple angry conversations, or does it cost him money? The reason you want third-party ownership is because there's an actual, real, monetizable, monitorable cost there. Okay. And it is very clear that someone other than the homeowner will feel pain if there's a problem.
Hey, Bob, if you drill a job, I'll start by letting you know I do DX for 20 years. I don't do water-based geothermal for a whole lot of reasons we could discuss another time. But if an architect designs something incorrectly and the homeowner sides with the architect, and the distance from that field to the final location of that compressor and air handler changes because of design, I will tell you, a reputable GC is going back and re-drilling that property to the tune of 20 grand and eating that money. And I'm here to tell you, money does not taste good.
A reputable GC.
It falls back on my head frequently.
That means That means he chose to do it because he's reputable. Okay.
Yes,
As
that is
long
correct.
as we're relying on people being good people, okay, we have seen over and over and over again, going back to Billy, we can talk to you about Sherman and God knows what else. Okay. Okay. We know that in this business, okay, we do not have as many reputable GCs or reputable installers as we would like. There are many excellent people out there, and we should never forget that. But the industry is being pulled down by bad designers, bad installers, bad drillers, bad everything.
Let me
Okay.
ask, aren't, so the state incentives, part of the reason why you have to register as a contractor to get the state incentives is so that the state can police the bad actors, correct? And cut them out of their approved contractor list.
No,
So are
No,
we having a lot of
No,
contractors on
not
the
at all.
approved list that are doing this?
we got plenty of them in the county who are horrible, and they never get kicked out.
Yeah,
So-
the state doesn't check on
it's the
quality.
So what is the
utilities.
point even then of having people have to register as approved contractors if it
Well,
doesn't matter
The
if they're
utilities,
registered or not?
you are supposed to be through the clean heat program. Every contractor that registers, you have to be registered in order to receive the rebates. ICF does between 10 and 15 inspections on every company's installation. And so they go in and they're random. And,
not anymore.
there's interaction with the customer. There's interaction with every aspect of the process. I've gone through a couple of them. And they're nitpicky on some things, more cosmetic than performance. They don't understand the performance side of things. But if you continue to fail that program and you don't take corrective actions on it, then yes, they will kick you out of it and you are not eligible to get the incentive for the customer. Now, that can be a bigger sword depending on how big the incentive is. There are plenty of contractors around that, they put in systems and they don't even go after the rebates.
Correct.
And if you're not going after the rebates, because you're a small outfit, a small operation, and the customer chose to go with that person because the contract was cheaper, they can still get to 30%, they can still get to 25%, then they're taking that risk at the reduction of the upfront dollar. And so the state does police it. I've seen a couple different companies get kicked out of the program. So it does have something there that, is not what New-York-GEO is. We are not a police force. We cannot dictate to our membership any way, shape, or form. We can recommend, we can guide the same way as ICHPA. But there's enough information out there. There's enough places on the internet that you can purchase a package of system, a unit, coil, loop, flow center, and any HVAC guy can buy that equipment online, go into somebody's house and install it. It exists. And now, if that is a geothermal system that fails, we don't ever hear that that's how it was installed. We don't hear that it was one of our members or one of the companies that have been doing it, and this is what they do. And unfortunately, we are expensive because we know what it takes to do it correctly. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying, Jackie. I've taken calls all over the place. And you'd love to help people, but again, that bandwidth just gets narrower and narrower and narrower.
The funny part is the homeowners that do it themselves without any experienced guidance of any kind and fail routinely have the same variety and types of problems as people who pay HVAC contractors who have no knowledge or experience in geothermal. So
They should. They're the same people. It's the same person. What's the
Yeah,
difference?
exactly. You would think that having HVAC background would prevent some of that, but it doesn't. And that's one of the key points.
No, why would that, what?
Geothermal requires specialty knowledge in a way that is not intuitively understandable from just having an HVAC background. The fact that people are,
Refrigeration, not HVAC very often.
pardon?
It's refrigeration background
Yes.
with heat transfer, heat exchangers, and how they actually work timing based on that water flow. And an HVAC contractor, exception being someone who's very, very good at hydronics and has an understanding, you're right, the knowledge is not completely
Yeah.
transferable.
It's not an intuitive thing, and some of these people do learn eventually, but it's a lot of years of failure and angry customers to learn all that stuff. So it may be
There is no
something.
way to force that on a customer base unless you get to a point where, like Bob says, you get into a massive organization that is going to take ownership of the QA side of things and goes out and puts a subscription-based system into somebody's house, and you go down the street and you're mass ordering the loop system, or you're doing some kind of a district system. There's
Well, we could
there's
require
always
third
going
party,
to be an issue.
we could require
Right, so-
third-party design specifications for the earth loop.
Where
The
are you
state-
going to put a requirement like that?
That's what's done in
Just
DX.
in
You
code.
can't even buy the equipment without it. In order to purchase equipment for a DX exchange unit, you need to provide the manual J. You need to provide all the specifications and how it's being installed.
Who
And there-
enforces that? Is that the state or is that the manufacturer or the
That's
distributor?
manufacturer. It's the
Right,
I would-
manufacturer.
I
So
would
if the
suggest,
manufacturer gives you a piece of equipment and something in that house is wrong, they're taking accountability for the failure. It's their fault.
Absolutely, absolutely they are.
I would suggest that it's become a code requirement, which of course is a huge lift, but what we're talking about sounds to be something that is a code enforcement requirement. And code can enforce things that used to, remember, before plumbing codes were invented, houses would routinely blow up from backed up sewer gas that would accumulate in homes because there were no traps, and there would be an explosion, and it would level the house and the 2 houses and 3 houses next door. Code came in and said you must have traps, and that stopped happening. So this is a viable possible option for state or local codes or what have us to say that earth loop design must be done by XYZ type of people with XYZ training, and then an HVAC person can come in and connect a machine to an earth loop that is known to be correct. And if that is done, a lot of the time things will do well. A manual J should, of course, be performed, but in theory, they are supposed to be performed already on any system that goes in. So
And a manual J is as good as the information that you put into it.
of course, and there are some very thin manual J sheets that perhaps should not be used for heat pump equipment. They may be suitable for gas, but perhaps we should say that people have to present a full manual J for a heat pump of any kind. I'm just making suggestions on what is probably enforceable and reasonable to do with something like code that would help tremendously to prevent a lot of these problems, because we are throwing people who are guessing 100 feet of slinky loop per ton, no matter what the soil type is, whether it's dry, wet, heating dominant, cooling dominant.
We get it. We get it. We get it.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
absurd.
The
and
thing that I would
code-
be careful
It's
about
beginning to
is,
sound like Ed Maroon.
yeah, we've played the code conversation for years, and a universal code in New York State is a nightmare of huge proportions. And I think that anytime you get into something like this, where, we do try to protect homeowners' best interests, and I can only speak for myself and, what we deal with. If we're okay with increasing the cost, because none of this gets done for free. And for years, all we've ever heard is make it cheaper. I sat in New York City with Bob Wyman almost 10 years ago, and he told me make drilling cheaper. It's not that big of a deal. Make it cheaper. Well,
That's not quite what that conversation was about.
in a roundabout sense. And
Here-
and not oh,
With-
but I'm not calling you out, Bob. I'm just saying
Okay, if you
there's a
remember, my
constant
argument at the
rate.
time was that by changing the process, by instead of focusing on one home building at a time and thus having the mobilization, demobilization, setup cost all on a home by home basis, that what we should do is we should be finding ways to batch install so that we could reduce the mobilization and demobilization time.
And I told you that that doesn't change the cost regardless of how you do it. And that plays out when you look at any commercial job site. The cost per bore connected to a manifold is more expensive than the one-offs every single time. It just is. I do it every year.
Here,
And
a lot
so-
of the
No, you're talking about the price per bore, not necessarily the cost per bore, which is a totally different subject.
when we're talking about
you're
higher
too smart for me,
costs-
Bob.
Yeah.
When we're talking about higher cost for geo, there are three places where there's higher cost. Genuine actual cost for an installer that has the capacity to install a working system that will perform to standards set by ICSPA or whomever. There are real costs, and this is the same as for any construction. Then there are incentive-based costs, which there's a whole other discussion about, and we can leave those out of this one for now. The third place that there are costs are risk-based costs that all contractors of any kind routinely roll into any pricing that they provide for any service they do, all businesses. If they believe that their risk is higher, they will add extra cost, extra money to the contract
Mhm.
to cover things like in the HVAC world, the expected higher rate of callbacks and screwing around and trouble that they expect to have. I'll tell you that I do the same thing in my design costs. I price different types of designs differently based on how much I think I'm going to get called by people with questions. And so my radiant jobs cost a lot more than my forced air jobs. And now in the end it works out, but when contractors are in charge of their own crews and their own designs, there are a lot of contractors who charge higher geothermal prices because they think it's going to go wrong and they have no idea how to control for that. I know this because I've spoken with the ones that do it. They don't know what they're doing and they don't know when it's going to go wrong, and so they just bump the numbers up to cover their asses for how much extra work they're going to have to do because these systems don't work. They already know they don't work. Well, it's like, yeah, yours don't work because you don't know what you're doing, and so you're charging the homeowner for your own ignorance. Now, this is just a rant, obviously, but geothermal, other than the earth loop, does not have to cost, and that's a big other than. But this is part of the discussion about what the state should incentivize. Other than the earth loop, geothermal does not really have a higher cost than equivalent types of systems, than equivalent heating and cooling systems. And there are some shockingly high prices getting tossed around for geothermal that are not earth loop based. And people need to be careful when they're talking about why these systems are so expensive and where the costs are coming from. It is sometimes it's what do they call it? The FU price. These contractors don't even want to do geothermal. They want to put a gas furnace in. So they charge, 90 grand for a 5-ton system, forced air, horizontal loop, because they don't want to do it. They're hoping the homeowner will say, oh no, I want to put in a forced air system. So just as we need to be careful when we're looking at what things cost is all I'm saying. There are some costs that are not realistic for sustainable geothermal installations that could otherwise be done.
I got to drop everybody.
Yeah, we're getting past there, aren't we?
Well, it's been a
by
great
by about
discussion.
half an hour.
You guys,
It's
and
been a
gals.
great discussion. Everybody have a good weekend. See you next time. Kevin,
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bob, thanks. Jackie, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jackie. We needed to
Yep.
hear that.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.